every organization that I've worked with, they tend to think that they are absolutely unique in the world, and that's why Agile will not work there, or DevSecOps will not work there. But I cannot tell you how much they actually are all alike in their own thinking.
Welcome to the Cybrary podcast.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Hey, well, welcome back.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Ryan Corey, CEO and co-founder of Cybrary, and I'm excited for you to join us on today's episode. Let's jump in.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Cybrary podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gruen, VP of Engineering and CISO here at Cybrary. And today we're going to be talking about DevSecOps. And I'll let our guest, Bella, introduce herself and give a little bit of background about who she is and what she does.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I am Bella Trenkova, founder and owner of Ardigent Consulting. At Ardigent, we provide Agile and DevSecOps services. We do a little bit of software engineering and cloud solutions, but the majority of our practice is around Agile and DevSecOps coaching and transformations. We support commercial and government cloud clients, and the majority of our practice, especially in the last several years, has been around security and commingling agility with security, bringing security into agile teams, and also bringing agility into security teams and helping them become more efficient and high producing, and that's that.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I look forward to talking to you about this. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, DevSecOps. I think one place I always like to start when talking about it is sort of what's your definition of DevSecOps, and then we can sort of maybe get into some misconceptions and of what it isn't or what it doesn't mean. So I'll throw it to you. What when you say DevSecOps, what does that mean to you?
Wow, you're alluding to something that I see over and over again, that it means a different thing to different people, and depending on whom you talk. But to me, as a coach, DevSecOps is more of a model of operation, and it's a set of practices that all need to be taken in consideration and integrated together in order to achieve the ultimate result of building high quality products faster and delivering them into sound and operable operational production environments. So again, it's not only automation, it's all the practices around team, process, culture, and technology as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's a lot of, I think in the industry, there's a lot of focus on this notion of like shifting security left, that it's about getting application development or operations to take on more security responsibilities. And I look at it as more of a bringing the two sides together, because for as much as we're trying to shift security left, we're also trying to shift those other best practices, to those other teams. So DevSecOps is, there's a lot of infrastructure as code. There's software engineering best practices that can be applied to security, to operations. And so it's really bringing those groups together in very similar ways. Like I think back in the 90s, there used to be QA teams and there was engineering teams. And now they're just sort of all embedded together, and you have SDETs, or software development engineers and test, or whatever you want to call them, where it's embedded. It's just part of the engineering organization, and you've sort of brought it all together. And I think that's what it really means for me. I know that's not necessarily the same definition for everybody, but that's what I like to think about with regard to DevSecOps.
I agree with you. And DevSecOps is, in essence, my analogy is that it's an extension of what Agile brought to the software development industry. With Agile, we brought together the old frenemies, friends and enemies from business and technology together, and we put the product owner to sit with the team. We also brought together the old frenemies of developers and testers to sit together and plan a feature upfront and talk about testing upfront, and then maybe test it together. And it's all the same principle, just extended to the old frenemies of development and operations, and putting them together and throwing in security into that whole party. So it's extending the party and inviting more stakeholders around the table so that they can work on their bits and pieces from very early stages of software engineering, as opposed to having them added at the end and finding that they don't fit very well together.
Right. I think sort of less assembly line and more just sort of team working together. I think similar, there's this notion of like a T-shaped engineer where they have a certain breadth of experience across a lot of things, and then they go deep. And so what you want is a security engineer who understands security very, very deep, but also understands the other parts of the business and the application and other or whatever, and operations or whatever other technologies are important, sort of understands it at a high level across the board. And you have operations people in that same boat, and you have software developers and back end and front end. They all have some appreciation for the roles the other people play, but then you go deep in your particular discipline, and then you bring it all together, and you just get a much better product because everything was engineered from the beginning. Nothing was added in at the end. And yeah, I agree. It just creates a much better, more efficient team.
Product, yes, and high-performing team, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think, one of the things you and I were talking about offline before we started recording was sort of misconceptions of DevSecOps. I'm curious what some of your thoughts on the misconceptions are.
Oh, absolutely. And the very first one is, way too often when people talk about DevSecOps, they immediately and automatically equate it with CI/CD automation. And yes, CI/CD automation is a huge part of it. And tools are critical to a DevSecOps transformation. However, I've seen way too many examples when teams focus on the tooling and they forget that DevSecOps is more of an operational model of operations rather than anything else. And it is breaking up those old organizational silos of having development organization, having separate test organization, having separate ops organization, having separate security organization, and all of them communicating through some very arcane enterprise change management processes. So until organizations don't address that problem of removing those internal silos and reworking their internal governance and change management frameworks, DevSecOps will be only an exercise in futility at the very best.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like tools are an enabler. Tools are an important part. The CI/CD, that's all integral into making it work, but they're not the solution. They're part of the solution you use or whatever. They're what lets you get the job done and work together. And I think, and when I think about some of the tooling and especially on CI/CD, I think of some of the stuff that we've done here at Cybrary, where from a security perspective, if I'm an application developer, the things just work and feel exactly the same as if I was just doing software engineering. So it doesn't really matter if something's not passing a security code test or a sniff test or a code quality test or some third-party dependency or whatever it is. Like from an engineering perspective, it all works exactly the same. I get a ticket or I get a failure. It's a note on a pull request, whatever it is. And I just work through it the same way I would work through any other type of thing. So it's using the tools so that each person on the team, I guess, is working together in the doing what they do best in the way in which they do best, and not having expectations of like, oh, our application developers are going to become security experts and will know how to use this totally different foreign set of tools, but more of this integration of all of these different tool sets to work together to enable everyone on the team to do better. But and also to your point of like just having the tooling isn't enough if everything is still siloed, if you still have a quote unquote security team and a quote unquote operations team and things are just sort of being handed off between them, you're not really going to solve the problem.
Correct. And you're also putting your finger onto something. And that's another misconception that some way too often I see teams that go through extreme lengths to incorporate a number of security tools into their pipeline. They implement their secure coding plugins. They have the scanners for static and dynamic code analysis, and it's all there built in the pipeline. And then pretty much nothing happens. Then teams realize that they're falling behind on their functional deliverables. They focus on cranking out functionality. The tools start catching issues, throwing those exceptions, but no one follows up on them. And teams start building up the tech debt. So having the tool is only part of the problem, but having the discipline, having the processes, having the zero tolerance of accumulating tech debt is also extremely important. And also developing that empathy and cross-functional area expertise of developers starting to understand the sources of security vulnerability so that they can prevent them as opposed to catching and fixing them. And also vice versa, security engineers understanding the nature and the iterative nature of the software development process helps. Because I also see it from the flip side, security assessor waiting for code to be perfectly baked in and done before they start assessing for security controls. And again, that's also not the answer.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you mentioned sort of a zero tolerance policy with regard to tech debt. I take a slightly different approach. I see tech debt like any other debt. It's like a mortgage on your house. Like if you waited until you had amount of money you needed to buy a house, like you'd never buy a house. So to me, it's just tech debt is just yet another tool, and it's coming up and it's working with the security team, the application team, the ops team, whatever it is, to come up with what's your acceptable sort of level of debt in order to get this through. But don't forget, we're going to have to pay it down. And like real debt, it's probably going to have interest. It's going to be more expensive to pay this down later, but it might be worth it because we need to get something done sooner. We can't wait for everything to be perfect before we ship it. But at the same time, we don't want to wait too long before we address these problems. And so to me, like that's really the balance that the leads or leadership or whoever sort of responsible, the VP, the CISO, whoever it is, to all work together to make sure that we agree on what's the right level of risk that we're willing to take in order to get the speed that we need to see. And it's always just trade-offs.
Fully agree, and common sense trumps pretty much any prescription and any recipe. So yes, there is always that fine balance. If you go too much one end, you will never deliver anything. It will be perfect, but not much. And on the other hand, if you wait for too long, again, the interest continues accumulating and it kills you at the end.
Right. Any other sort of misconceptions?
Anything else? Another misconception is that we can buy DevSecOps and people can hire an external vendor to bring in all their tooling and all their magic and have consultants spend 6 months to build the pipelines and then they can be let go. And that's, again, a huge misconception because DevSecOps is a lot more than tooling and piping. It is culture and its behavior and its people. Another misconception is
actually, before we move on, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think if you're thinking about outsourcing DevSecOps, if you will, then you're really thinking about outsourcing it more permanent. It's not just let's hire some contractors to come in and build this and then it's done and they can leave and now we have everything that we need. It's more like, I can see it if you're a small company or in certain circumstances where you can sort of outsource it, but it's a continued you're going to continue to pay for it for whatever. It's an investment that you've decided, hey, we don't want to necessarily have this all in-house, and and it might work, it might not. It's like any other sort of service that you might pay for. But I 100% agree. You can't just, and we did that a little bit here when I first started. We wanted to get some of the CI/CD set up, and we knew exactly what we needed. And I was like, why don't we just hire a couple contractors to sort of build this out? We can take it from there. We knew what we wanted. We had them build exactly what we wanted. And within a very short period of time, we realized like, this isn't going to go well because they're making decisions. They're not making them the way we would have. We're going to have a heck of a time really maintaining this once they quote unquote hand it off to us, even though we were very prescriptive in all of the things that we wanted. And so we sort of pulled the plug on it and went ahead and built it all ourselves, even though it was a little bit more painful. It was worth it because, right, if we had just waited until the end and for them to hand it off to us, we would have it was dead on arrival essentially because we wouldn't have been able to maintain it.
I'm really glad you stopped me here in my tracks because you really remind me of something else. And again, that goes into the whole set of misconceptions about DevSecOps. It's not a one and done effort, and you're never done with DevSecOps. It's again one of those agile principles of continuous improvement that you always have something to optimize, fine-tune, improve. And on the same heading, expectations shouldn't be set so that we will be DevSecOps in a month, or that's a simple or easy feat. And with my teams, when we build the product backlog in parallel, we build the DevSecOps backlog, and we work on those. We start with the MVP of a CI/CD pipeline to have just enough automation to unblock the developers so that they can start producing some demonstrable code. But then we continue adding on features to the pipeline, and that's an effort that goes for months more often than weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think any technology engineering, I've used this analogy before, but it's like mowing the lawn or getting a haircut. Like you're never done. You go, you get it, and then it grows back. Like there's always work to be done. It's a never ending job, whether it's application development, security, and then DevSecOps, which it really is, in my opinion, just taking software engineering best practices and applying it to security and operations, which means it's just another engineering feat. It's just another continuous delivery and continuous improvement. So yeah, you're never done, which is both probably positive and negative from a lot of perspectives.
True, and that's another principle that people need to watch is really how far are you willing to go and pay, because with DevSecOps, first of all, it's not easy, it's not cheap, and people who make those investment decisions should always know why they're doing it and what is the trade-off, what's the benefit they're getting. And there are different, more than 50 shades of gray in DevSecOps, and there are different levels of maturity. And depending on the business context, it may not be necessary for a team to invest, for one team to invest as much as the next team. And again, all these investment decisions should be balanced against the expected value and benefits from all of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's interesting. What I find interesting about that is because it is an investment and you don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold. I would say that a slight overinvestment is probably better than an underinvestment. I think it's much more expensive to do things. In my experience, it's much more expensive to try and get some of the stuff done later, just like tech debt. And so sometimes it's worth the sort of upfront extra cost for things. If you're not, it's a balancing act. Again, you don't want to over-engineer, you don't want to over-invest, but at the same time, knowing that it's going to be way more expensive down the line to change things, especially when you start talking about culture and cultural changes and behavioral changes. That's where things can get really hard. And so I think continuous improvement of the process, evaluation can help with that. But I would caution teams. I think when I think about Cybrary, one of the benefits we really had was because we were cloud native. Everything was already cloud. We could, and when we replatformed, it was relatively easy to put in a lot of the DevSecOps that we wanted, and had room for the future and knew what we wanted to do. But it was also easy because I was head of engineering, security, and operations. So I got to make all those decisions and make sure to push the things the way, there wasn't that silos. And I think it's a lot harder for organizations. I imagine this is what you experience as a consultant, going into organizations that are trying to go through a transformation, as opposed to a company like Cybrary, which gets to sort of be born this way. So yeah, I'd be curious, like, what your experiences have been as a consultant going into companies that are trying to transform. And, is it easier to sort of get there in baby steps, or is it easier to sort of try and bite things off? Or like, how do you generally go about that transformation?
So that's a really great question, because it makes a great deal of difference whether you're a startup born on the cloud and you're already at the place where you can innovate, and you can innovate with your processes, you can innovate with your tool set and tooling and everything. And it's also smaller context, but when you bring that same desire into an organization, which is a 3-letter government agency or a major financial institution that has been around for decades, and it's not only what they currently have, but it's also the mindset of people that have been doing, and they have been trained and groomed to do the same thing over literally their decades-long careers. It is difficult, and when we talk about agile and DevSecOps transformations to such organizations, my mantra is patience. It takes a long time. It's really series of baby steps. It is tiny, small, little experiments and small wins that need to accumulate over time, so that completely closes this feedback loop of we've tried something new, we took a little bit of a risk, we didn't completely fail with it, and actually we saw a little bit of a benefit, let's do it again.
Do you find taking more of like a project-oriented approach to like large organizations generally have multiple engineering teams, multiple concurrent projects that are going on. And so rather than sort of taking an existing thing and transforming it, looking at, hey, what's a project that you guys are starting on now, and just sort of starting that way and doing it that way, and sort of allowing the legacy systems to be legacy, and sort of working on chipping away from a new perspective. Is that an approach that companies take that's successful, or government organizations?
Well, generally the approach is, it's usually summarized as 1, 3, many. So you start with one pilot and you pick something that's relatively safe enough, should it fail, but also it's significant enough so that it really makes sense to invest so much time and energy into it. So we start with one pilot, and we literally babysit that pilot to make sure that that team has all the support they need, from tooling to executive decision making to bringing a coach to support them over time. And as we go through the pilot, we keep track of all the new practices they have implemented, and we keep track of also how it worked. And at the end, we have that. And currently, I'm literally in the process of writing my retrospective for a pilot that we ran for the past 6 months, of list of practices we implemented and how they worked and where we fell short and how we should adjust. And then the next step is going through that retrospective of the pilot, having the meeting of the minds of the organization undergoing that transformation, taking it apart and analyzing all these root causes for the things that didn't work so well, putting back into the transformation backlog of things that we want to change about the organization. and disseminating the lessons learned across multiple additional projects or additional efforts within the organization. And again, it's a very slow evolutionary process, and it's all about the continuous learning and making right steps in the right direction, or small steps in the right direction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. I'm just trying to think, like, of all the different places I've worked and over the years, like when we've gone through some of those transformational things, how many of those projects have resulted in sort of success, and we can look back and we can say, okay, cool, now we understand, we have a roadmap and we're going to do it again. And how often it might have resulted in, maybe this isn't for us, this is too hard. And taking a step back, I imagine I just wonder if there's some organizations that just decide that, like, we see the benefits of this, but we don't see how we can actually get there. Like we did the pilot, and they just sort of just our company culture, the regulations that are on us, they can probably come up with a million excuses about why this isn't going to work for them. I'm curious if you've had those sort of experiences, and if you've been able to sort of battle through it, or how that's gone.
Well, there are always excuses, and the first one is, but that's how we've always done it. And my reply is, well, we've always done it that way, and we've always had that result that all of us agree that we are not happy with, and that's why we're trying something new. And if we want to change the outcome, and generally everyone agrees that the outcome needs to change, there is a very broad there is a broad understanding within the technologies that they're not capable to deliver to highly adaptive business environment, and technologies that are often falling behind and not being able to deliver to business needs, and that need is well recognized, but where leaders get stuck is knowing how to break out of that vicious cycle. And that's the plug for bringing in a coach from the outside, so that a good coach can challenge all these misconceptions. It can challenge that stuck in the type of a thinking, can bring in a fresh perspective from outside, can bring in also the experience, both successes and failures of other organizations that have been in your shoes just not too long ago.
Right. And probably can also do what you just did, which is take that step back and say, like, look, forget about the problems. Let's focus on the outcomes. Let's focus on what is it that we're trying to change, and agree that this is what we want to change. And we believe that adopting this new methodology, this new approach, we've seen it before. It's not like this is brand new and nobody's ever done it. And you have that experience to sort of help an organization sort of understand that. Whereas I think sometimes it's really easy, especially if you're working there and you're trying to manage up or you're trying to manage down, whatever it is, you can sort of get locked into debates or brought into debates that are sort of beside the point, if you will. They're like, okay, that's all well and good, but we can talk about this all day long, but we're not actually going to solve the actual problem we're trying to solve, which is the way in which we're doing business today. Just, it's not efficient. There's too many security gaps. There's too much this, whatever problems you're trying to solve. And I meant, right, a coach, an outside person can really help to sort of unentangle that and bring people, sort of like to the table in sense of consensus of, well, we all agree that we're trying to solve this set of problems. So I think that's a great point about why sometimes an outsider or an outside help or coach can really be beneficial, even if you think you have all of the skills to do it internally. There might be some other things that you're not really accounting for.
Yes, and every organization that I've worked with, they tend to think that they are absolutely unique in the world, and that's why Agile will not work there, or DevSecOps will not work there. But I cannot tell you how much they actually are all alike in their own thinking. And Agile has been around for about 20 years, DevSecOps almost 10 years.
Right.
And we are well past that initial adoption curve, and both have proven, and there is such tremendous track record of success for large, small government, commercial organizations that have done it successfully. And sometimes it's just a matter of expectations, unrealistic expectations, and leadership giving up too quickly, whereas they should have planned for much longer transformation, as opposed to have one project one and done and then expect that anyone else can repeat easily the same pattern.
Right. We've shown you the path. Now just everybody else just do the same exact thing that this other pilot did. Right. It's just that easy. And I think you brought up when you were talking about Agile, I think you brought up an interesting point. There's, in my opinion, there's Agile with like a capital A. It's like Scrum and like very regimented, and then there's what Agile was like in the early days, and what I think a lot of others, which is it's a very flexible process. It's about, I view process as a tool, and a tool is supposed to help you get something done. It's not, you don't do something, you don't bend your will to the tool. You get the, you bend the process to what you need. And I think that's where organizations can also get hung up on the notion of Agile. Oh, Agile won't work for us. It's not that Agile won't work for you. It's just that there might be a specific, if you try and follow some of the Agile methodologies too closely and don't take into account your own company, your own culture, your own needs, that's where I think it can start to fail. And I think of Agile as being a very flexible process, even though I think there's also a whole group of people out there who don't believe it's very flexible. I think that's where there can be some friction. But you and I've talked about that, and I consider Cybrary being continuous delivery, which is similar to Agile, but I wouldn't call it Agile. But it's that very, there's multifunctional teams working together. We all have, there's regularly scheduled meetings to talk about certain things, but it's just a slightly different process. But I think that's an important part, is that it's not just like, when you start talking about Agile, I think especially at some levels, people start to bristle a little bit when that's not necessarily the case. I think there's a lot of room for adaptation, and I'm sure you've seen that.
For debate and adaptation, and I'll get for a minute or two in a soapbox. So Agile, again, is a set of prescriptive practices. And they have been put in place almost like the training wheels on a bicycle. So when a team or organization is new to Agile, it's really easy to get them started with a framework such as Scrum, because it's prescriptive, easy to follow. It provides certain guardrails and gets them into some good habits. However, those prescriptions, they were put in place because there are an easy way to manifest certain behaviors that are that are falling into the core of the Agile principles. So and if we pull apart the prescriptive practices from the principles, and from the principles, we even go a little bit deeper into values and mindset of why we're doing things in a certain way. And that's generally the progression. And the Japanese term that coaches love to use is the Shuhari concept, progressing from the early stage of being a trainee and apprentice, learning a skill, into the stage of mastering the skill, and into the third stage of being basically defining the skill, or as we also call it, following the rules. First, you need to follow the rules before you can start breaking the rules and experimenting around them. And then you get to a level of mastery, which is you become so fluid that you start defining the new rules. And just because some teams have a Scrum Master and have daily stand-ups and they have a backlog in Jira doesn't necessarily make them agile. Versus other teams that absolutely have none of them, none of those things, but they deliver fluidly, they deliver often, they have that customer-centric focus, they understand their value. They're, again, a lot more agile than the other team. And again, it's such a small word and means so many things to different people. But when we say you're agile or you're not agile, or you're doing agile, you're being agile, we really have to dig deeper into how you're doing things and why you're doing them and how this is aligned with the core principles and mindset of agility, as opposed to with the desire to control and
well, right. It's actually more rigid. I mean, right. There's plenty of places I think that, as you said, believe they're following agile or being, doing whatever, but it turns out they're so rigid that they're not, in fact, really adhering to the values. They're more, they're going through the motions without understanding what it is that they're trying to achieve. And I think, it's as you were talking about the different things, I was sort of thinking about other analogies, whether it's, going from a cook who's following certain recipes to becoming a chef, to becoming like that sort of master who understands all the different flavors and is able to make their own recipes. Or you look at someone like Pablo Picasso, right? Who, when he was 14 and 15, was making photorealistic, paintings, and recognized that, photography is a thing. So you don't need a painter who can do realism. You need a painter who can sort of take it beyond that and can paint things that you can't see. And so again, that's what made him a master. Was first he mastered realism and then was able to paint all these other things. And I think those are like really good analogies with regard to like why we go through the processes that we do. In some cases, yes, having that prescriptive thing just makes it easy for you to learn a system, be within that system, understand the values, and then you can start to iterate and move on from there. I think it's a really great point worth highlighting.
But on the same token, you cannot become Picasso and become that abstract painter before you actually learn the basics. And sometimes teams tend to go way too quickly through the basic and start breaking the rules and adapting the frameworks for something that works well for us. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, the plug for having a coach who can keep the team honest. So why are you doing that? Are you doing it for convenience and because you're cutting a corner, or are you truly being innovative and you're trying something that actually works better for you and for your customer?
That makes a lot of sense. And I think we sort of derailed there a little bit. I'm curious. I'm trying to remember. Were there other sort of misconceptions or anything else we wanted to highlight?
Way too often people think that DevSecOps is out there for speed and speed only. And faster delivery, shorter cycle times is definitely one of the objectives that we are striving for, because that's what helps us put the goodies on the table and give them in the hands of end users, and so that they can provide the team, the development team, back with feedback about what works, what doesn't work. But on the same token, DevSecOps is also about quality, and quality with all of its multiple dimensions, from adherence to acceptance criteria to code scanning and code quality, looking into those code smells, also reducing security vulnerability, and quality also in the sense of ensuring the system is highly operable and maintainable in production, because we don't want code that does whatever business wants it to do. It's thoroughly scanned, but when you put it in production, no one knows how to maintain it, or it's not instrumented for monitoring, and does not help the maintenance team with that preventive maintenance that needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when I think about like the benefits, there's the obvious benefits of, shifting that security and making it so that what we produce is more secure, faster. There's the rapid part that you brought up, but there's also the shifting, as I started at the beginning with shifting some of these engineering best practices to security and operations, especially infrastructure as code, the reproducibility, the all of the things that come out of that are, as we've moved into this virtual world where I can build a virtual data center that, in the 2000s would have cost me millions of dollars to build an actual physical data center. I can now just sort of codify in a few lines of code and, it's just containers and then some containers and within containers and virtualization and so on and so forth, making sure that I'm maintaining that in a way. I mean, that is just source code, and making sure that I'm using the same engineering best practices that have always been used for source code towards that sort of more infrastructure side of the house improves reliability, improves reproducibility, scalability, because now if you want to scale up, it's like, oh, cool, I have the recipes for whether I want to have more machines or bigger machines, horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, all of that sort of there. And just, I think back also to like going to data centers and like looking at the server rack and just trying to figure out like who plugged this USB device into this server. I don't even know what that does. And I'm scared that if I remove it, something bad's going to happen. But at the same time, I don't think it's supposed to be there. And from an operations perspective and security perspective, like now you have a full document of exactly every single system, how they're connected, how they're supposed to be connected. And if there's anything wrong, like it's just lines of text. Like it's so much easier now. You don't have to have some like document that says, oh yeah, last time we were down at the data center, Bob plugged in this USB drive because we were running out of disk space, and that's why that's there. It's like, wow, like it's just so much nicer now in this, in the virtual world. And I think it's another area where DevSecOps, it's that infrastructure as code, that's an important mentality, an important shift that's happened. It's not just these servers and hardware and all of the control you get over how things are supposed to be communicating to each other, and how you configure firewalls and networks and subnets all within this virtual environment is so much easier now because it's just code. It's not a bunch of hardware. And going from machine to machine and making sure that they all have the exact same config, and potentially forgetting one or whatever. So yeah, I think there's so much benefit that comes out of it that goes well beyond just the sort of, I think what people think of, which is rapid application development. There's a lot of lift you get out across the entire technology organization.
Oh my God. Now you made me remember many years ago when I was a junior project manager. I was working on a project for a government organization in DC, and there we needed to have development server, staging server, and production server. For the development box, we were able to beg somebody to give us a little bit of give us access to an existing dev box. But for the production server, we had to wait at least 6 months. It was about 6-month ordeal from the procurement to shipping it, to first of all creating the specs for the server, to shipping it, to racking it up, to hardening it. And it was hours and hours and hundreds of emails checking on the status of the damn production server. And by the time we were ready to deploy to production, the software vendor of the package that we were customizing, the cost package, they upgraded their version, which was no longer compatible with the box. And we were back to square one. And now we work with teams that automate exactly the provisioning of cloud resources. So within the government organization that I work with, if somebody needs to set up an AWS or Azure or even GCP enclave, we have those Terraform templates that the template itself runs. So it still takes a few weeks for the customer, the government customer, to give us their specs, sign a memorandum of understanding, do through a little bit of government formalities, and then it takes 15 minutes to actually stand up the entire environment and give them the enclave, which is already hardened. And with built-in guardrails where they can start standing up their environments. And it's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an important part is the speed at which we can do those things requires that the rest of the team is able to move as quickly as well. So you said like they stand up, we have this virtual environment, stood up and it's already hardened. Imagine a world where you could stand up that, those systems, but it's not quite as hardened or it's not gone through that same sort of rigor. And so I think it's because so many other aspects of software and technology can be deployed so quickly, it's important that all of these other things keep pace with that speed in order to make sure that we're all sort of moving at lockstep. Otherwise, really bad things can happen. And I've never really thought about it from that perspective of how important it is that the other parts of the business are able to move at the same speeds. But yeah,
it is. But we are also making great progress by completely restructuring at least how that portion of the government agency works. It's extremely flat. We have a team of teams. Within each team, we have all the resources that we need. We have the cloud engineers. We have the cloud engineers who know how to write infrastructure as code. We have security engineers all together. And they, within that two-pizza team, they can build a fully working product. The last stronghold is the government ATO process that nobody likes because it's the last really piece of the puzzle that is still waterfall, basically. That part of the organization, it's usually an ANA type of organization, waits until the entire product is done and only they come in and do the assessment. And we are currently in the process of negotiating, bringing them into the team and making their assessment be as incremental and iterative as our build-out effort. So I'll keep you posted on how.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a pretty big challenge. But yeah, I want to be cognizant of the time. I'm curious, any final thoughts or anything from your perspective? If they want to learn more about you or your company, where can they go?
Well, definitely check us out at ardigent.com, ARDIGENT. We have a blog where we share some thoughts and we put out in display our bruises and wounds from, our kind of hands-on experience with Agile and DevSecOps transformations. Again, the experience from the last few years was mostly from the government sector, so it may not appeal to everyone from your audience, but being here in the DC area, I'm sure that there are plenty of those who might be interested. So I will be happy to share thoughts.
Oh, great. And so thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll give you one last opportunity because I didn't really give you much. If you did have any final thoughts to share, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
No, Mike, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.